Good evening and welcome back to your view with me, JJ Tabane. We're coming to you live from my home and of course live from Linden, where Newzroom is standing by. She'll be taking you through the global numbers for us to assess how the pandemic is looking like. But tonight on the show, we're focusing on leadership. And of course, now we're coming to government leadership now. Prince Mashele, who's a political analyst and a friend of this show, is going to be talking to me about what he believes the situation is in as far as leadership is concerned. He wrote a scathing article published in the Sowetan this morning saying that President Ramaphosa is more of a crisis manager more than he is a leader. We'll be starting that conversation there, but we're also going globally to pick up on some of the themes that we spoke about to advocate Nalim Pofu. Prince, good evening and thank you for joining us tonight.
Good evening, JJ, and good evening to viewers at home. It's a pleasure for me to join you.
All right, Prince, let's get straight into it. A lot of people, as you've noted in your article, praising President Ramaphosa for leading the nation in this time of crisis. Firstly, by declaring the first round of lockdown and then extending the lockdown in order for us to be able to flatten the curve. Why do you believe otherwise? Why do you think that he has not demonstrated the leadership when so many believe that even if you may fault him with whatever you like, he has been able to lead from the front in as far as tackling the COVID-19 crisis is concerned? Prince?
Let me answer it this way, JJ. I think that the current challenge facing the whole world, and in specific South Africa, needs a leader who has 4 qualities. Quality number 1, clarity of mind. So in other words, the kind of leadership that clearly identifies the problem. And I'm going to expound on it. Number 2, you need a leadership that is competent, so that people are convinced that the leadership can do something to dig South Africa out of the crisis. And I'm going to expand again. Number 3, you need a leadership that is empathetic. So people who are experiencing hardship, who are hungry, who are losing jobs, they must have a sense that their leaders understand what they are going through. Number 4, you need a leadership that is bold, that takes tough decisions. Now, if I look at these 4 qualities, President Cyril Ramaphosa doesn't have all of them. In terms of clarity of mind, for example, he has been able to identify the coronavirus as a serious challenge, and we have to give him credit for that. But what he has not been able to do, in my view, and I wrote in the article today, is this. He hasn't identified quite sharply the second challenge, which is the big economic problem, which is also a social problem facing South Africans. So with regard to the coronavirus, he did well to place us on lockdown as a country as soon as possible, which is why our numbers are not as scary as places like Italy, like Spain, for example. But with regard to the economic aspect of the problem, there is no evidence that the president is taking bold decisions. Let me give you an example. What I think he should have done by now. It is very clear that our government is broke. Our government doesn't have money. And our government will run out of cash as soon as possible. But what has it done on the part of government to save money? There is very little that he has done. Number 1, I would have used the crisis to immediately close down certain state-owned enterprises that are a liability, such as South African Airways, for example, such as the South African Post Office, for example. I would have, or even close 70% of our diplomatic offices all over the world. If you do those 3 things alone, you can save a lot of money. And you can rechannel that money to do 2 things. Number 1, to provide further economic stimulus into the economy. Number two, to feed the hungry. So when it comes to the economic side of the crisis, I argue that the president has not demonstrated boldness.
Okay, Prince, let me deal with the issue that you raised about the president being a crisis manager instead of a leader. Why the dichotomy? Won't you agree that any leader's test is really during times of crisis rather than during times of happiness and plenty? In other words, when the country is facing dire straits, that is where we can be able to see leadership. Why do you create a dichotomy between him being a good crisis manager and him being a good leader?
Well, I look at his history as a leader of government, and I see no evidence of him being a leader. I see evidence of him as being a crisis manager. Let me explain to you. You see, when he took over the South African state as president, there was a deep sense of restlessness on the part of millions of South Africans that this country was broken. So he came in and spread a message of hope. He sold a thing called a new dawn, which actually never happened. So there was a sense that he was managing the crisis facing our country at the time. But what he has not been able to do, which is what a leader must do, is that you need to go beyond managing a crisis into providing leadership. In other words, dig your country, dig your society out of the hole and take it out there. Cyril Ramaphosa has not been able to do so. So, for example, while he was spreading a message of hope in society, unemployment was deepening in South Africa. While he was spreading a message of hope in the country, no one was being arrested, for example, on the part of those who looted the state. The criminal justice system, there is no evidence that it has been fixed. But he actually came across as someone was managing the crisis, but he has not been able to take South Africa beyond the crisis. That is why I'm painting the line between being a crisis manager and being a leader. So there is no evidence that Cyril Ramaphosa can take us beyond a crisis into a better place.
After the break, I want us to interrogate a little bit of some of the qualities that you've mentioned. For example, clarity of thought. A lot of people may say he may be slow, but at the end he gets the work done. If you look at the SARS Commission, the PIC Commission, even the State of Capture or the State Capture Commission, these are necessary steps that he could potentially be seen as using to clean up. And so some people may argue that is part of the clarity of thought. You mentioned the issue of empathy, the fact that there has been funds set up to help small businesses. The UIF is being ramped up to help those who are not employed, etc. during the time of the lockdown, may be seen as that empathy. I want to talk about all of that after the break. We're talking to Prince Mashele, political analyst, as we talk about leadership in a time of crisis. Stay tuned. And welcome back to your view. We're talking to Prince Mashele, who is a political analyst. He's been telling me that President Ramaphosa does not fit the bill of various criteria of being a leader in this time of crisis, that there is no clarity of thought, that there is no empathy, that there is no competence, in fact, if you just deal with those three. And of course, you can also, of course, send us your own views about what you think of whether or not our country is led, because you can always send us your views on Twitter at #YourView on 405. You can tweet us at JJ Tabane at Newzroom 405. Do you think that we are led? Do you think that the leadership of this country has shown mettle in terms of taking us out of this crisis? Also, of course, be exploring what's happening around the world. Prince, if I may give you that opportunity, as I was saying, a lot of people may actually give or give a tick box that says on clarity. The guy may be slow, but he gets the work done, and maybe he has his own style of getting these commissions to tell him what to do, or at least guide him in terms of what to do. On empathy, they may tick a box to say you got a solidarity fund, you got the private sector contributing at his instance or at his call, and people are being given food parcels. People who are starving in small businesses can apply for all kinds of assistance. What's your take on that kind of contrary view, Prince?
Well, that contrary view is not honest. Any South African who's honest would know what I'm about to tell you. Number one, since Cyril Ramaphosa took over the reins as our president, he has not been able to clean up the criminal justice system. Yes, there is a new head of the NPA, but there are no results that show us that the criminal justice system now bites. So that's number one. Number two, since Cyril Ramaphosa has taken over as president of South Africa, if you are honest, you would know. Numbers don't lie. More and more South Africans have lost their jobs. Three, since he took over, the economic situation of our country has worsened, and the culmination of that is the latest downgrading by Moody's. So I actually don't make or share opinions without basing the opinions on facts. So anyone who thinks that I am wrong, that person must tell me and give us evidence that more and more South Africans have not lost their job, that the criminal justice system has arrested senior ANC leaders who have been implicated in state capture, for example. All of those things have not happened. So on what basis would you argue that we are being led into a better place as a country? There's no basis whatsoever.
Yeah. Prince, is there something, if we were to do a scorecard of President Ramaphosa, and it is inevitable to compare to where we come from, where we had, the men from Nkandla, 10 wasted years as it's been characterized, utter corruption, just kleptocracy all around. Are you saying that there was no shift whatsoever in the leadership stakes, if I may put it that way, in our country since Ramaphosa came on board? He may have promised heaven and earth, certain things may not have happened and so on. But do you think we are in a slightly better place in as far as leadership is concerned, and that is translating into how the coronavirus is being handled? I mean, if you look at how the ministers are coordinating, in a way that we have never seen before, and not that we must praise the the fish for swimming, but the fact that we need to appreciate that something seems to be shifting. Would you completely disagree with that analysis?
Here's the thing, JJ. There is no question that Cyril Ramaphosa and Jacob Zuma are chalk and cheese. So Jacob Zuma was an unashamed thief who was just looting public resources. So during Jacob Zuma, the business of government was converted into open thieving. That has stopped since Cyril Ramaphosa took over the reins as our president. Today, the business of government is no longer open thieving. So the thieves out there are a bit scared because the president himself is not a thief. Number two, he is a man of dignity. So he's a dignified man. So when he stands in public and he speaks, South Africans are prouder to look at him and say, there goes my president. But that's the end of it. If you were to judge him on the basis of results, let me tell you, JJ, nothing fundamental is moving ahead. So in other words, as more and more South Africans getting jobs because there is a dignified man in the office, the answer is no. Despite the presence of a dignified president, more and more South Africans are losing their jobs. And God help us. My prediction is this. The situation economically is going to get worse, and it has been worsening, even under a dignified president who doesn't steal money. So we have a president who doesn't steal money, but in my view, who is incompetent, in the sense that no interventions that he is making are actually improving lives in South Africa. If you think I am lying, show me the evidence. And there isn't.
Yeah. Just let's look at his team. I mean, would you fault someone like Minister Mkhize, Minister of Health, in terms of how he has managed to handle the situation? Would you fault the security cluster led by Minister Nosiviwe Mapisa Ngakula as well as Bheki Cele, in terms just purely on the issue of managing the current crisis? Would you dismiss them altogether as having not shown their mettle as leaders? Because that's really what we're talking about. Is there something we can build on in terms of the current leadership, or are we in a hopeless situation?
Look, the ministers have tried their best, and we must commend them for trying their best. The best thing that this government has done is this, is to place the country on lockdown soon enough to slow down the spread of infections. That is the best thing that this government has done. There is nothing more that this government has done than that. So, if, for example, you were to ask the question, has this government improved the readiness of our public health system to cope with the virus if we're to have numbers skyrocketing? The answer is this, and they know it, by the way. It's no. So our public hospitals are not ready to deal with a situation like Italy, for example. So there is no intervention that was made by government that has ramped up the capacity of our public health system to be able to cope with a situation like Italy, like Spain, or even the US. So the reason why they were able to place the lockdown soon enough is because they knew that the public health system is so broken that it wouldn't be able to cope with a situation like Italy. So we must commend them for placing the country on lockdown, but we must not give them credit for things that they have not done, i.e., they have not improved the capacity of our collapsed public health system to cope. I mean, our health workers are already threatening to go on strike because they don't have PPE, for example. Obviously, it is not only South African health workers who are facing that challenge, but there is no evidence that this government has capacitated our national health system to be able to cope if we were to have a major crisis.
Yeah. After the break, I want to talk about exactly that point you've just made now in terms of international comparison. Are we being a lot harder on ourselves? Because if you look at the same examples we have made of Italy, UK, and the US, they seem to be collapsing under the sheer weight and horror of the coronavirus. But what was interesting yesterday, President Trump talking about as if it's a completely new thing that they're going to start doing, tracing and tracking, something that Minister Mkhize spoke about more than 4 weeks ago, already having over 2,000 tracers and what have you. It looks like the United States having 10 times less tracers than it's necessary. We're going to talk about that after the break. Prince Mashele, I'll help you to understand political leadership in a time of crisis. When we come back, we talk about how the international leaders have handled it all. Do you think Boris Johnson in the UK, for example, led by example by being in a hospital where he wasn't treated especially, or at least that's what we are told? Do you think Donald Trump is just being himself, which is being petulant even in the time of crisis? We hear more from Prince Mashele after the break. good evening and welcome back to your view with me on JJ Tabane. We're coming to you live from my home in Johannesburg. For the rest of the lockdown, we'll be bringing you the show from here. Of course, Newzroom will be taking you to 11 o'clock with some of the details of what's going on around the world. Truly a calamity around the world. The curve still sharpening and being very steep, and that calls on all of us, South Africa, to stay at home and assist with the regulations. Okay, let's talk more leadership with Prince Mashele. Prince, give me a sense of, first of all, how you see the one or two big international leaders, how they handle this. You can start in the US and go to the UK, but also address what I had said, that don't you think that some of what we have done here, in fact, has improved, in a sense, what has happened in other countries who have learned and what happened there, and we acted quick enough to make sure that we don't fall into the same trap that the other leaders out there fell into, where they didn't take the thing serious. I mean, in the US, the president started calling this thing a hoax, and before he knew it, he was sitting with so many deaths, or as we said, almost a quarter of all the deaths in the world. Prince?
You see, there is something I'm seeing in the world, JJ, with regard to the coronavirus, is this. In countries where there is no unity on the part of the leadership and on the part of society, the situation gets worse. And unfortunately, such are democracies. So if you look today in the world, the worst affected country as we speak is the United States of America. Why? It's because, number one, they have a crazy president who did not take the threat of the virus seriously. He called it a hoax by Democrats in the beginning. He called it Chinese flu in the beginning. And he did not take it seriously. So that's why the US is actually the hardest hit. Even the US citizens themselves, they kept on debating among themselves and differing and treating this virus as if it was not a real thing, which is why the Americans have been affected. But there is a glimmer of hope in the US, JJ. There is a man called Andrew Cuomo, the governor of New York. In my view, he is actually the best leader globally so far in terms of the way he's handling the coronavirus. Number one, he is competent. When the man speaks, you get a sense that he knows what he's talking about, even though he's not a medical doctor. Number two, he explains the functioning of the public health system in New York and in the rest of his country. And he tells his people what they should do and what government is doing to make the situation better. So the way he communicates with society, you can see that this is a well-rounded leader who understands the situation, who is competent. But with regard to which country in the world, in my view, has dealt with this situation better, actually it is not an autocracy. It's not China. There is a small country which is almost the size of South Africa in terms of population. Its name is called South Korea. It is acknowledged, JJ, that today the best country that has been affected by coronavirus, which provides the best conditions of life, it is actually South Korea. What did they do there? There are two things that, in my view, have constituted the main pillars of what South Korea has done best. It's testing and tracing. I mean, I have been to South Korea, so I know what I'm talking about. There, if you drop your phone, the next day the police could knock on your door and say to you, "Sir, last night you lost your phone." How are they able to do so? The whole country is electronic. They're able to monitor the movement of people. Why? Partly because they're a security state. They're threatened by the presence of North Korea in the north. But because of that, they were able to reorganize their society in such a way that they are able to monitor what is happening across society. As a result, when they have tested you and you have tested positive, they are able to follow your movement, including the movement of people you come into contact with. South Africa doesn't have that kind of capacity, which is why even people who have been tested positive, some of them, by the way, in self-isolation, they can actually move without the state being able to monitor where they go and what they do. So the best leadership in terms of systems in the world, it's South Korea. The best personality in terms of leadership, in my view, it's Andrew Cuomo, the governor of New York.
What is your assessment of how Boris Johnson has handled the crisis? Of course, also having to deal with he himself being infected and ending up in hospital, which could have been a serious test of the NHS, as it is called. In fact, if something drastic happened to him, it would have been a serious embarrassment for that health system. Your take?
Two things about Boris Johnson. Number one, we need to commend him for showing leadership by going to a public hospital when he fell ill. So we need to commend him for that, because it's a show of confidence on the part of the highest office in the land, in the public health system of the United Kingdom. That's number one. Number two, we need to descend on him very hard for recklessness. Remember how he got infected. He used to brag, by the way, in public in the beginning. People forget this. He said, and I saw him, by the way, addressing a press conference, saying that, no, I continue to shake hands with people, so I don't have a problem. That's how he got infected, because he was shaking hands with people when, at that stage, the coronavirus was already in the UK. He should have stopped shaking hands with people. He should have provided leadership by demonstrating to society that social distancing is critical. It's like the case, for example, of the Minister of Communication here in South Africa. Government told us we must socially distance ourselves. The Minister of Communication was going around having lunch with friends. So we really need to be critical of such conduct, even on the part of Boris Johnson.
Yeah. Do you think that in the continent, any examples there of leaders who acted fast enough? I see there are a couple of countries on lockdown as well, even though the cases have been minimal. Any shining light of leadership in the rest of the continent outside ourselves?
Generally, the continent has handled this situation much better compared to the rest of the world, in particular European countries. This is what the continent has done. We closed our borders very quickly, mainly because the rest of the continent was scared that if we were to have the kind of crisis that we have seen in Italy and Spain, the continent would not cope in terms of our national health systems. So the first country, by the way, to provide leadership was Kenya. Kenya closed its borders when there were 3 confirmed cases already. I mean, think of it, JJ. Here's an African country. They look at what is going on across the world. They close their borders and place the country on lockdown only when they confirmed 3 cases. The second country is Rwanda. Paul Kagame. He's not a Democrat, but in a context of a crisis like this, you do need decisive leadership. Paul Kagame didn't play games. He placed his country on lockdown, and some people may say he was harsh in the way in which he was dealing with those who did not respect the regulations. But you need decisiveness. The other country is very close to us, by the way, is Botswana. Also there, they placed their country on lockdown very, very early. We must also give ourselves credit. Even President Ramaphosa, despite everything that I have said, he acted very quickly in terms of placing our country on lockdown. If we did not, I think we would have a worse situation in terms of infection rate now.
Yeah. As we round off, Prince, and let's look east now. Do you believe China's numbers? Do you believe that, after that deep crisis, they only had 3,000 or so deaths? Is that a believable number in terms of the scale of this crisis as we see in other countries?
No one believes the numbers in China. Not even the World Health Organization can confirm those numbers. And that's the thing about the numbers, JJ. You get them from countries. So when you have countries that are autocratic, a la China, you just have to depend on their weight. But what we know about China, by the way, is that, number one, they delayed to tell the world about the discovery of the coronavirus in the first place. So they told the world very late. So a country like that, I would never trust. Number two, the doctor who discovered the first case of coronavirus in China was arrested. And the guy is dead as we speak now. Why did they arrest a guy who was alerting them to the presence of the coronavirus? It was helping the world to prepare for the worst. So such a country, I would never believe numbers coming from such a country.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Prince, thank you so much for sharing of your time as usual. Really appreciate your time. Keep up the good work you're doing, as keeping us all on our toes and pricking our conscience. Thank you so much for your time tonight.
My pleasure, and good night to you and to viewers at home.
All right, that's Prince Mashele, the political analyst, of course, firing missiles as usual about the state of our nation. Do you think that our government has accorded itself well in as far as leadership is concerned? Continue to share your views at JJ Tabane at Newzroom 405. We would really like to continue the conversation. Tomorrow I talk to Big Business, Hipopi Jana, President of Business Unity South Africa, as well as John Dludu, the CEO of the Small Business Initiative. I'm my guest tonight as we now focus on the economy. Post-corona economy, the role of big business, as well as the role of small business as we gear ourselves to recover from what is truly a tragic situation, where it's already estimated that between 1 million and 3 million jobs will be lost. How is big business going to behave? Already we're in a grips of recession where big business was already retrenching people, small businesses are dying. And so tomorrow, the economic conversation on our Business Tuesday here on Your View. So do stay tuned and join us again tomorrow, 8 p.m. Central African Time. Of course, Lindy Serame out in Linden, standing by to take you to 11 o'clock as we look around the world to see the extent of the coronavirus, how our country is coping with it, how is the curve flattening, if at all. Of course, Lindy Serame bringing that to you every night now at 10 o'clock to make sure that you keep in touch during this lockdown. South Africa, stay at home. But until we talk frankly again, may God bless you.